So the 1EC has been sent. Emory's good. Okay, sweet. I see 2 of the judges. We're waiting on Al. Oh, see him now.
In just a minute.
Sounds good. Just let me know.
15 seconds. Okay. If everybody else is good, I'm good. Apologies.
Emory, just let me know when you're good. I see you're like walking around. Sweet. The world spirit is dead if it ever exists. In its place lies the world computer, the machine of abstraction and computation that encrypts the world's myriad qualities as quantities. Reason doesn't drive history because thought itself has been automated by the collective unconscious of this regime of quantification. This year's topic is an invitation to consider the conditioning of geopolitics and its interpretation through the will to abstraction, the subjugation of meaning and truth to the prosthetic of quantification. Alliance commandments are not discrete legal agreements, but derivatives of this network of global commodification. Likewise, wars are no longer fought between nations and ideologies, but instead against all that which threatens the vast derivative market of simulation, computation, and risk management, from NATO's hyper-real cyber war simulations to the financial management of the genocidal civil war in the Philippines. The informatic derivatives of the resolution transfigure this geopolitical order of knowledge, transforming it into bite-sized chunks that disguise the civilizational racism that is an axiom of the world computer. The knowledge economy debate is structured by this vast derivative market of warfare, automated as the banal expression of the racial unconscious. Information is not a natural property of the world, but rather the elaboration of real abstraction resulting from the general management of values of social relations through information's collective unconscious. The world computer structures meaning itself, turning every informatic act back towards the maintenance of the system. Meaning has become circumscribed by this episteme of financialization. Realities of ancient black and colonial systems of genocide are crystallized through derivatives and risk management strategies, from the ledgers and cargo holds of slave ships, modern bail, debt, and housing, to the creation and sharing of military technology and police technology through the alliances. The world computer runs on this codification and recodification of information as social difference. It becomes inseparable from reality itself. The creation of massive computation that encodes alliance commitments arose out of this unconscious automation of social relations deriving from the military census taking of Nazi Germany and the U.S. occupation of the Philippines. In other words, the overproliferation of abstractions concerning alliances does not remove bias from information, but instead disappears the social relations of civilizational racism in a process of reification that encodes disposability and death along lines of racial capital. That's valid 21. The unconscious computation of racial capital built in the box of modern computing finance 1889 Holler patent the punch card system that used in sets of Germany and the Philippines. How this company remain itself IBM, the company, the technology was separate from racialization, genocide, sense once concerned and opposed to racializing, given the world of historical progress, never to colonization, the Philippines, racial fantasy meets right without meets metaphysics meets world spread there. Exposed power is not just evidence for the occasion for the performance self-evidencing of Philippine sense sort nation, the sensible use of Philippine, especially to encode colonial meaning of Philippines, computer technology, birth in the Philippine American War, and the Holocaust associates was a substrate computer-based imperialism described in operating system, process of abstraction, hither violence of abstraction, dialogue, conscription, or inscription of sociality, goes subject for the next generation of consciousness, ad infinitum, we have a new mode of automated genocide, fashion, and media emergence occurred, real war crisis, the symptoms of the genocidal tendency of automated logistic racism as once a symptom, operational legacy of slavery, colonialism, statistical methods used by IBM are operative, a separate principles, irresponsible defenses, not only for good computer business, good for computerized business, consumers, but also facilitate a real-time imaging of your living room, thanks to Zionism, Cell-Colonialism, Palestine, statistic information, war machines, and markets, world management techniques for unreal humans and non-humans by capital society, ethos, content, different, sustainable, so long as derivative humans are concept providers, common control over bodies is extended by the machine built to the vertical domination and conscious place of transcendental subjects built upon the slavery and gender violence as automated balance or disappeared, utilizing surface inscription for everyday transmissions, the dispossessor, disavowed, subshaded codification process by sovereign operators, not Hegel's role to Marx critique, can explain racial capitalism, global south, worldwide distribution as an endemic to the geopolitics of subcomputation, racial capitalism, products of the world computer, the computations, organized capital, also organizing racial, the global south, computational, unconscious names, global function, crisis analysis, revolution, we have the radical disappearance of the conditions possibility, what is the consequence, we have the organization of social practice, futurity on the basis of what is materially coded absence. Likewise, stability, security, and anarchy are not objective states within the operations of the world computer, but rather technologies of meaning that are automated in advance by the semiotics of quantification. The reversibility of war and finances abolish great power conflict. Instead, the subjectivation of war is found differentially across the colonial state of emergency inaugurated by informatic racial capitalism. This constant reterritorization of war domestically and abroad enables the derivative function of capital to profitably abstract ever greater amounts of data for its own justification while securing its material foundations. Our challenge to the system of commodification of life requires a challenge at the level of abstraction and interruption of the information paradigm where the meaning and truth are restricted to the feedback processes of the world computer. That's how these laws are at 18. Reeling the subjectivation of subwords during the time new war machines, financialization of the helmet global war, the subjectivation, global subwar, the subjectivation of symbols results from semiology, covered pragmatic struggle, occupied the Indian non-student movements, fought the Arab Spring, protests, Brazil, clash in Turkey, circulated, organization, distorted, oblique subjectivizes racial class warfare, the Arab limitlessly terrorization, not far by racist reterrorization, imbalance between war machines and fascism, the struggles against the world system is political, imbalance, but also intellectual, with the hard revolution movements, the constant war, the reversibility of war, economy's basis of capitalism, economy pursues a competing war, through other means, officers, the Chinese Air Force, the defined financial offenses, blood, war, just affect this bloody wars, you have turned the entire world to battle, the wars, the state of war, in bits and pieces, states, emergency, bar, colonial, post-colonial war, back into the spotlight, time refugees are evidence colonial technology in the infinite war stated by which neocolonial wars no longer take place only in the margins of the world, but the moves to ascend of the stability pact and the security pact to utilize the same code constantly, restructuring the world economy, credit war, the condition of existence, reproduction of capitalism. The story of Isaac Newton reveals this dynamic interrelation of geopolitics and technology. We're told that as he sat beneath a mighty tree and watched the apple fall, he applied his powers of reason to manifest true knowledge of gravity. However, what is left out of this narrative is a crisis of truth central to the scientific episteme of knowledge. Newton's justification for his theory required colonists to spread themselves throughout the world, violently tearing open foreign spaces to take measurements for his theory. Conquest then is a sensory prosthetic of the world computer where abstraction has become the only route to truth and divergence between information and noise. Information arises as a bloodstained derivative of the world that must be dissolved into a quantification of differences simultaneously. Anything less than information becomes incomprehensible. Every way of knowing, living, or dying otherwise are eliminated into cybernetics, noise, or that which cannot be represented as a 1 or a 0 within the predefined set of interactions set up by the colonial model. And so we must ask, if the function of computation is the automation of thinking, then what does it mean that the dominant thought is the thought of domination? The world computer is this planetary project of evaluation functioning on difference to arrange the basis of its genocidal conditions. That's Fellow 21. Shocks expressed at the suggestion of Google or Facebook racing symbols, people who raise with technology value neutrally, iterated to dead. Yeah, scientific research with a few correctives will work neutrally, but it's regarding the images on the machine, like the world, the component network. These machines of abstraction signs are coded up, external abstractions operating on material substance, include phenomenons, labor, cold time wars, and the Holocaust, necessary incarnate computation, acts of computing, or planetary process of evaluation. There wasn't inequalities already coded the same domains with the logistical race nation. A class only hopes the revolution attacking the racial capitals, ordering the history of racialization is sedimented into machines that organize our thought. The recursive is part of the financial calculus leverage to produce accumulation, dispossession, computation, racial capitals, no bites, burnout, genocide, war, economism, carceral society, climate injustice, blazing. It's impossible to divert the process of subaltern calculus, dirty computing games, generate conceptual arbitrary tools refined by revolutionaries and international relations are the results of this closed knowledge system relying on feedback loops between epistemic and ontological structures of the world computer to configure the horizons of possibility for geopolitics. The data-saturated logic of the global synchronizes within alliances to culminate in the necessity of endless geopolitical disasters. Its axiological core disappeared into a sea of data and fabulation. That's Freezing 19. Recursive between epistemological and ontological remand perpetuates different sociogenic principles that predetermine possible to tie the alien to terrestrial and recursive freedom between epistemology and ontology, automated conquering populations subsumed by the monological survival. Like no scientific man justifies permanent war against populations from on Earth, from data to problems to calculations, from mentality to transcendental magic, automated man, fallen ran, sword wars, associated, distributed, military, independent attack. In the self-fulfilling prophecy, nuclear destruction prevailed as removal, West-East conflict, eliminate social self-destruction, molecular proliferation that have no motive strive, induced unremittingly by insecurity simulation of being an automated society creates castles, omnipotence, constantly declare states of emergency for the planetary crashing of self-determining consciousness. And debate also operates through the system of disappearance, visualizing alliances such as NATO only through a truncation as information for recursion and iteration. Even as the noises of the crisis outside restructures our activity into Zoom calls and chat boxes, we're told to stubbornly return to the same code year after year in a resentment-driven will to abstraction COVID, along with thousands of other holocausts of racial capitalism's derivative system, from debt to municipal plunder to resource extraction to Palantir's military tech. They can all be informaticized as impacts, almost always be filled away in abstraction, unable to invite us to debate and live otherwise because the limits of instrumentality have been automated far in advance of any resolutional statement. This is the horror of the world computer, the disappearance of the world that's up into the banality of information where social difference ceases to be anything other than the mutable substrate of financialization. Against the demand to input a binary 1 or 0 into the operating system of the world computer, our affirmation of the resolution refuses the presumed instrumentality of the question in favor of the proliferation of the beautiful cacophonous noise of the otherwise and outside. Only this rethinking of thinking can reveal the geopolitical alternatives that are excluded from the episteme of the world computer. Rather than continue the automation of thought around alliances, our affirmation insists that our mutual dispossession must be refigured as a condition of possibility for a new communist horizon. This affirmation invites you to join us in a cognitive strike against the instrumentality of the world computer. For all nodes in the world computer, this revolutionary experiment demands that we are use the technological prosthetic of abstraction that it offers, and instead proliferate alternative models of knowledge that cannot be enunciated or truncated through the derivative form. This cybernetic communism mobilizes a new conceptual arbitrary and reparative knowledge operations to devise tools of revolution against the world computer, radicalizing and restructuring the semiotic libidinal political economies of Fellow 21. Given the change in language, the image of the music representation, the music production, they program our imagination, we speak their thought of representations, that's still a version of ourselves back to ourselves, so that we can perform further work. Therein lies the ontological like starter, therein lies a desire to become a plantation manager. Those within the circuit of these discussions path through homogenization process, which programs them incompatible systems, languages, also making ourselves radical critique, run the risk of trying to set up a competing corporation with a new business model, and the anti-capitalist we runs is a risk of not thinking about the materiality of social production to take the internet as an autonomous technological force, results in platform fetishism that disavows the history of material conditions of its emergence. If we want to cooperate productive their desires and self an iteration of capital thing, the thinking runs us capital nature, capital eternal, capital's information is nature, the situation represents the derivative logic, which every action is a hedge model for political agency, radically transform the urgent need to decolonize communication presents itself. We will see economic transformation of the material relations of production. Reproduction is essential to the revolution. We're drawing the cognitive linguistic resources, the radicalized and marginalized, configure the ways to make our voices felt for the reorganization of the world. These starts to the seeds, means of production, creates a reverse assumption of affect, knowledge, communication, and community. From the historical perspective, the individual subjective age is nearly defunct. There's an effort to overturn, at least to live something beyond being described in the world computer. There are aspects of the desire of the program to produce practice in accord with capital accumulation. The desire of the aspects of the other collectives and self-time global inequalities in terms of being. How can we render actionable the communitarian solidarity? That's could there be the derivative communism? We're looking for that path in anti-political intervention of relations that have this planning handed towards environmental doomsday. Requires a revolutionary culture. The culture taking into account that organics and ongoing cosmical here is to reproduce semiotic and affective structure of practice, including our Anderson's idea making was actively produced solidarity with the divestment, open spread against which on which about against the dominant order we glimpse and we feel we insist upon a culture making cross-cultural transnational solidarity avoid platform fetishism fascism because he sees machines as historically inversion system built directly upon techniques of gender racialization, imperialism, and embedded in the flesh of the world. We not yet what can be destroyed in deep, but we know there's a total war against solidarity associated with the refusal of capitalism's encouragement is itself a creative act. We perhaps we will begun to glimpse what refusal, what total refusal might achieve. Go Deeks.
Go Deeks.
If you'll let me get a quick sip of water, I will be ready for cross-ex. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. The Beller card you just read describes the necessity to shift towards a cybernetic communism. What differences are there between this cybernetic communism and the current methods of organizing economic power?
What do you mean, like the current methods, like between anarchists and Marxist-Leninists? There's vast amounts of differences.
No, I mean like the way economy is organized in the status quo. So we would probably both agree the status quo is capitalist. What are the differences between the status quo is capitalism and the
I mean, like the status quo isn't like uniformly totalizingly capitalist.
No,
like,
but the dominant
economic orders that are very distinct and unique throughout the world.
I mean, obviously they exist, but the dominant economic organizing structure in the
dominant
world.
where?
Okay.
Like we've made an argument about the way in which the world computer materializes financialization, but the idea that that is synonymous with some market incentive rational system of global capitalism isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, it goes much beyond the logic of simple capitalism. But I guess to answer your question, I could read a line from the card. It says that models for political agency are radically transformed, and the urgent need to decolonize communication and decolonize finance presents itself. It will see economic transformation of the material relations of production and reproduction as essential to the revolution. It will draw on the cognitive linguistic resource of the racialized and the marginalized to configure ways to make our voices tools for the reorganization of the world.
So what does it mean? What is that line, the first line you read about, decolonizing informational and computational spaces mean?
Well, we've made an argument about the way that there is a computational unconscious that prefigures and automates thought towards the production of fascism and the continuation of genocide. Our argument about the general cognitive strike in the context of the affirmative and alliances is that we should withdraw and refuse to give our labor to that process and instead dedicate it towards the imagination of a new world, a new sociality, a new relationship to alliance architecture.
And what does this imagination do to resolve the problems that you've identified with the current alliance architecture?
Well, I just explained that it reallocates labor, but also it opens up the possibility of the yet unknown potential of refusal. Our argument is that we can't explicitly say what all these things will or could be, because to make such a statement would be asinine, but we can understand that there is an ethical imperative to do so.
Okay, last question. Why is it good for us to negate or debate the F?
Because
we think that you can participate in a project of revolutionary planning where we develop tactics and understand our ethical and subjective possibilities as people, as debaters, that activates our political horizons for something beyond this world.
Sure, but the AF agrees it's good to test strategies against each other. It's good to compete, have competing political projects.
Are we competing, or are we cooperatively discussing something better?
Well,
the concepts like clash and competition that you're using are things that we would problematize. We think that debate has a role. It's just probably not the kind of deliberation that you want to have.
One NC's been sent. It's 2 off. Case. Adrian, do you mind putting in headphones or something? Can I just get confirmation from the judges and wake? I see 1 judge, 2 judge. I see wake. I see 3 judge. Okay. I'm going to start in the next 10 seconds unless anybody has an objection. First off, our interpretation is that the resolution to define the division of ground was negotiated and announced in advance, providing both teams a reasonable opportunity to prepare. Only a textual reading of the resolution provides a predictable basis for research. USFG is a 3 branches located in DC. U.S. legal no date. The USFG established by the Constitution has 3 branches: legislative, executive, judiciary. Resolved means to enact policy by law. Words and phrases 64. Definition of resolved to express an opinion about a resolution or vote. It was resolved by the legislature means to establish by law. Mutual defense pacts refer to international treaties. Further, 18 pact and treaty treaties synonymously the Vienna Convention. Treaty means an international agreement concluded by states in a written form governed by international law. Both treaty and pact refer to an agreement governed by international law. Vote -1 is clash. Debate requires states to motivate research to develop third and fourth line responses. Third, interpret explodes limits, makes the app conditional, enforces the negative concession or ground. 2 is fairness. The neg should win an average 50% of the time, and any unfair advantage is a reason why they should lose. Their argument are shaped by the drive to win, so presume their arguments are in bad faith. Next off, the 1AC Beller evidence says mass scale consumption that encodes alliance commitments like NATO is bad and reduced post-AF. The globe is transitioning towards an American-led computational regime. Now the apps action leads to Russia, Phil, and Rodfeld and Arquilla 18A. No assertion of body much in America stands for the rule of preference for peaceful conflict resolution, and no would require organizational and technological foundation to uphold its destiny. The world is not yet in the notosphere, but a transition is far from that. America's notosphere is broken up into volatile culture, unity, kitchen struggle far from the fusion. The tailored forecast that units are polarized and culture wars underway. Turns case, NATO bad causes disastrous foreign policy choices. Other bad actors they exist besides the U.S. and its allies. Letting Russia overrun small and defenseless countries ensures failure. But repurposing our alliance towards beneficial cooperation activities solves all of their criticisms of alliances. Formula 19. Imagine a leftist finds in the White House what if Putin takes the bolster there by invading the Baltics. What if China, Russia, use some states to lost infrastructure, oil, are you glad I'm not a war arguing neocons in response to far left coalition arguing that avoiding conflict with Russia is the best achieved by doing whatever watch is not viable. The U.S. should not overrun defenseless countries. Negotiated powers to address global issues would offer more than current foreign policy. Any leftists can reduce defense spending, and foreign policy requires responding to other actors' repression of the Uyghurs, Donbas, Syria, confusing conflicts not to conform to the narrative. One good guy, bad, one bad. NATO become useful. NATO could be useful towards promoting left foreign policy. Collective agreements are not inherently bad. Case. The techniques of the 21st century is an intrinsic good. Informatic opacity causes mass humanitarian atrocities on Bronfeld and Aquila 18. Geopolitical polls organization assists with conflict and anticipation of resolution because of information revolution. NGOs activists monitor and report with AC tools provide early warning about disaster relief like the civil war and Syria atrocities like chemical weapons attacks. It's less about control than monitor decontrol. State actors can adapt to emergence of independent non-state actors. No politics is mercantilist or exclusionary by nature. Intellectual property solves disease. A communist derivative which pools knowledge against the investor classes. Cognitive general strike. Zero vaccine development. Schultz and Stevens. 21 critics of IP were wrong. Tech is under development for decades, followed by investment startups. Investors stem billions in mRNA prior to the pandemic. The results would not have been possible because the private sector which depends on IP. Academics are not good at developing choices, so investors need to know there's protection. IP helps not render, not hinder started collaboration. The claim heard was IP it poses a barrier to knowledge sharing, so IP should be low since and or pulled rivals. Show capital. IP redrives competing products, put a lid on prices. None has a monopoly. IP repeatedly fight disease or allows no innovators to scale up and licensing tech to partners who have skills and capacity to manufacture large quantities in low income economies. So there's a competitive market in which manufacturers are incentivized to improve vaccines given a new strains which emerge. Disease causes extinction. Pebble and Armstrong. 15 disease is one of the greatest causes of mortality in history. Majority die from single largest greater probability than assumed features in nutrient accurable. Fatal infections, long incubation, combined death tolls, extreme outer transport to population infections spread rapidly. Political and ag disruption, economic dislocation, damage to trade, fragments human society, recovery impossible human succumbs to other risk, climate change, further pandemics. The world computer enables big data for smart cities through the cloud, key to environmentally sustainable urbanization. Con 15 balancing big data sports decision making necessary for sustainability and resilience of smart cities. ICT really provide integrated perspective to deal with sustainability. Cities can benefit from cloud resources for large scale data for climate to process millions of data points would take much longer. 50% of the world's population live in urban areas expected to increase range of limited resources affects sustainable development. A city admin get new knowledge hidden in large scale data enable efficient transport planning, water management, waste management, energy efficiency, risk management, pollution, urban sprawl, and biodiversity loss. Cloud computing processing solutions facilitate storage and delivery capacity to process, visualize, and analyze. Unsustainable urbanization triggers resource shortages and overwhelms Earth's environmental capacity. Extinction. Crib. 17 cities will be 8 billion inhabitants by 2050. These absorb 4.2 trillion tons of fresh water. 75 billion tons of metals. Existence depend on precarious balance between essential resources and the capacity of Earth to supply them. Sustainability will want are lost in cities, giant cities, at risk of resource crisis. Capitalism solves extinction through green tech. Innovation gets off the rocks. At 20. Knowledge is most relevant to flourishing. The humans can survive in space by transforming resources after compounding scientific and economic growth. Capital and profit motive facilitate innovation. The top 10 are capitalists. No cities of capital are other systems produce greater innovation. Marx for the bourgeoisie created more productive forces than all preceding generations. Tech have been proposed carbon capture inventions to remove plastic seawalls, mitigate sea levels by ending capital and ability to create knowledge rapidly turn into a catastrophe. Sustainability is a problem in capital solution. Capital allows R&D to be funded. We would be crazy without to choose as alternative to capital extinction. Surveillance globalization is key to stop ecosystem collapse. Our Arfisberger and Mina 18. Many believe globalization has been harmful to the environment. Globalization can trigger environmentally friendly technological innovations that can be transformed to globalization convene these technologies are passed on. Anti-globalization means less specialization, increase in local emissions, weaker environmental standards, worsen emissions here started refining its own crude oil. Globalization doesn't prevent public awareness and labor and environmental standards without trade. Consumers would have limited choices. Unchecked climate change causes extinction. McKibben 19, how human extinction could play out. Oceans kept warming, stop oxygen production, disrupting 2/3 of oxygen, mass mortality of humans, permafrost preserve microbes and viruses, fragments of Spanish flu, smallpox, plague, ice sheets, trigger earthquakes, increased volcanic activity, wiping out all signs of life, productivity, flat line corners, vulnerable things deteriorate, fast food riots break out, plant damage from insects correlated with temperatures. Unsustainability claims are suspect because our brains are wired for techno-pessimism. Digital synchronity with alliances and states counters racial governance. Reinhardt 18, many are pessimistic about tech, but life is getting better. Property continues to decimate. People are living longer. The digital revolution has resulted in info abundance, helping correct asymmetries that plague humankind. Psychologists know our brains are wired for pessimism. There's a lot to fix. There's racism, impeded tech systems. The best way to handle issues is human ingenuity. Startups had an altruistic focus online services for people without access to doctors and automated gen, a counseling tool. If we live in fear of what comes next in the future won't be built, optimism needs to be applied. And if IR isn't dead, globalization displayed the poignance of nation states, not their obsolescence. Booth 17, language use, wars, diplomatic deals, power plays, so they attract criticism from colleagues who out old thinking that IR had been seen out of touch, but it's now full of globalization met the obsolescence of IR. Globalization is in play. Sovereignty, authority, and identity. Globalization is embedded in a world in which nations remain defining feature. Daily headlines shout at this Putin's ambitions North Korea's nuclear blaster. Refugees provide evidence those who want to build a better world will never achieve it by being unworldly about this one. They don't solve one. Utopian fiat is bad. Fiat's other solvency, which is in the focus of the debate over alternative econ arrangements, messes with the uniqueness of disadds. 2, normal means isn't derivative communism, but a transition from decentralized to centralized capitalism ensures sustainability, but a cognitive general strike ensures global war. Delio 20, the economic order is changing. The free market is no longer determining capital. Governments are. The new system will be different from the capital. As the current crisis unfolds, we should remember capital has proven best it can be flawed. It is raising productivity by living standards to make society better. The new system must increase the size of the pie and divide well. Alternatives are civil war that shrink the pie for everyone. 3, transition away from growth fails. Buck Hansen 18, political projects need power and resources. Degrowth is nowhere near anything support. It is considered common sense that growth is required to at least support the new level of project. 2008 crisis is now resulting in the weakening of capital. Degrowth political decision makers are eager to create conditions that are conducive to production. Advocates of degrowth do not possess instruments to force decision makers to listen to. People find it almost impossible to have capitalism. Their sense capital is the only viable system. It's impossible to imagine an alternative. Degrowth is incompatible with lifestyles of rich countries. Growth premise on consumer culture. Consumption has been exploited. Limitations to their consumption, violent encroachment on freedoms. Few are prepared to change lifestyles. 4, degrowth fails. Major economies will rebound, but even contemporary collapse stops renewables. Tokich 12, the stock market crash and resulting to deleveraging could emerge in inflation, which causes layoffs and unemployment. The economy would implode or sharply correct. Expect policy intervention given pent-up consumer demand. Expect long-term positive trends in environmental issues would be less important during implosion, which could delay alternative energy carrying capacity will be exceeded as growth resumes. Decrease in demand for entry are likely to be temporarily positive. Implosion would be but negative for environmental concerns. That modest growth carries significant risks. 5, no transition. Heinberg 15, it's hard to convince people voluntarily to reduce consumption. All organisms maximize rate of energy use were hardwired to respond to immediate threats. A small percentage may change, the great majority is less likely to do so. The actions of a few may not mitigate hazard. The crises have been apparent since the 70s. Not as much stability as it can accomplish. No endless war. The public is prudent. Rosati and Scott 14. No matter how uniform the public is, officials are tempted to support the mainstream rapidly disapproval rally on the flag. Support tends to dwindle over time. The war, longer the war lasts, the more public support will. Where the public tends to discriminate over the use of force, and it's pretty prudent in Iraq. Polls show that a majority oppose force since Vietnam, with differing views have arisen. This made it difficult for the rally and maintain support. Extinction outweighs bomb and period. 18, some catastrophes are vastly more important than others. Humanity could go extinct, loss of all future generations. 500 trillion lives, and maybe an underestimate the risk equals probability times magnitude. Society should try 500 trillion times harder to prevent global catastrophe than to save a person's life. While everyone has a right to their own lives, the strongest arguments for the widely held position that all human life should be valued equally. Philosophers speak of a veil of ignorance, which considers what is best for society, irrespective of which number they happen to be valuing everyone equally, suggest a very high value for reducing GCR. Consequentialism doesn't preclude compassion. Williams 5, the real tradition is not like responsibility of others, it's a strategy but justification left for the diversity of irreconcilability by reducing itself and others to a matriarchal calculation to allow structures of mutual intelligibility. Responsible to act must go beyond deconstruction. That's fine.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
And are you ready for cross-examination?
Sure.
Sweet. First, I want to ask about these Ron Felt and Archaea cards, both on the disadvantage and at the top of case. What is the noosphere?
The noosphere is not something that the 1AC forwarded, but this argument is rather just that, like, other forms of organizing around technological.
You're not answering my question, but that's define the noosphere.
Okay, Adrian, do you know the definition of the noosphere exactly?
That's not particularly relevant. Again,
Exactly.
No, it will be, and I'm asking you what it means because
there's
of two pieces of evidence that you read. So tell me what it means.
Yeah. Henry answered this question already. The point of this card is that it's mentioning that sort of decentralized, autonomous modes of economic organization are less desirable than
I
one that
am very sorry, but I don't care what you think the point is. I want to know what the new sphere is.
Planetary sphere of reason. Old
Planetary
philosophical
sphere of reason. Okay, sweet. Next, I want to ask about the sort of like intellectual property is key to disease. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, international property law prevented countries in the global south from
Disagree.
developing vaccines and sharing information with countries in the global north. Sanctions are currently preventing countries like Venezuela from receiving the vaccine. How does that in any way prevent the spread of disease?
First of all, your description speaks to the effect once the vaccine has been developed rather than the steps that brought us to the vaccine. Our card is very specific, says that people that were developing NRMA, sorry if I get that acronym wrong, but the type of vaccine that the COVID vaccine is, were only incentivized by those, forms of market incentives.
And they were also incentivized to withhold the information they produced during development from countries who were also trying to develop the vaccine.
The fact that we have the vaccine at all is an anomaly, and that capitalism produced a vaccine at all is a large accomplishment.
But only the global north has the vaccine. Don't you think that's a problem?
Yeah, obviously that's a problem.
Okay, sweet. Next, I want to ask about the Zimmet card. Talks about getting off the rock. Who gets off the rock?
I mean, like the concept is that everyone eventually will with enough access.
I mean, when? Like,
I don't know.
Before the world like collapses?
The whole argument is that there are unknowable things that could cause human extinction, like climate crises beyond our capacity to solve, or natural disasters that wipe out the humans.
Okay.
The only way that we can survive as
I'm running out of time, so let me ask just one last question. I see what you're getting at. This piece of Reinhardt evidence, what is technological pessimism?
Just the idea that it's an attitude of negativity towards pessimism. The 1AC adopted that. The 1NC is an adoption of
this piece of evidence says that psychologists know our brains are wired for pessimism, and then proceeds to assert that that also applies to technology. How do you know that that is true?
What do you mean? Like, if our brains
like this evidence doesn't say that we're uniquely pessimistic towards technology. We've made an argument about how we're actually wired towards techno-optimism.
It says we're pessimistic overall. Like, all includes technology. I'm not sure what that question means.
That's a weak claim. Want to take prep, Tessa?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll start prep. Sorry, I was on meeting. We stopped prep at 9:25.
It's been sent. There's a send delay on, so it should take like 30 seconds to get here. While we wait for that, I will go over the order. It's going to be case with an overview. Then I'm going to answer what they call the offense section of case, and then the defense section of case in the 1NC order. Then I'll go to the disad, and I'll do framework. So reverse 1NC order, if that phrasing makes sense to you.
I guess that's how it was tagged on the doc. I wasn't looking at the doc. What card or where is the offense and defense part start on case?
Sure. That's why I kind of flowed these on the offense and defense part on separate pages. So I'll be doing case, and then I'll be doing the stuff where they were like intellectual property, tech innovation, capitalism are necessary, all the way down to the IR not dead card.
Okay.
Then I'll be going to the utopian fiat card argument down to the extinction and consequentialism debate. And then I'll go to the disad, and then I'll go to framework.
So basically 1NC order on case.
Cool, thanks.
The doc's been sent. Let me know if people have it up. Okay, Al's good, Matt's good, Emory's good. Cool, Tom's good. Let's get the show on the road. Roberto, do you have a sip of water that I could have before I start speaking? The world computer is the virtual machine of capitalism, a historically materialized logic that includes value and truth, a genocidal project of quantification, the extension of thought through prosthetics of computation programs, the collective unconscious of politics, guiding every informatic act back to the system as data in this extractive feedback cycle that manifests the reality of their evidence seeks to describe. This should make you skeptical of the attempt to confront alliances of the level of information debate itself destruction as a vast derivative market of alliance commitments betting on the volatility of the world order while insisting upon its separation from it, which means that debate's product of instrumentality can only ontologize the world and IR within a blood-soaked circuit of abstraction and logistics. This is where you thought we'd say that information is dissuasive, but strap in, folks. We're also saying it's racist. The computational unconscious is constructed through an endless feedback loop that inculcates us in a desire for the endless expansion of valuation and financialization. It extends from debt to NATO's war on refugees to Duterte's regime. The ongoing global genocide, the intensification of global crises constitute an interconnected system via which the codification of race, gender, and geography through histories of enslavement, colonization structures meaning, voting affirmative, feasting, and wager against alliances, betting on the possibility of a noisy outside to information armament that asks you to participate in a cognitive of a general strike against the instrumentality of prediction and cognitive labor that is withdrawn via the structure of debates prediction, withdrawing the system of cognitive extraction, opens up space between what is and what could be. It is foreclosed with the computational unconscious. It generates, it's an activates our political horizon to produce a communist driven against the system that proliferates. It's a noise in the ways in which we do not yet know the potential of refusal to actualize alternative systems. The first argument that they have put out is the noosphere argument, which begs the question of what is the noosphere. The Rumpian evidence articulates is the noosphere the highest state of historical and evolutionary development of human thought, where data media consciousness exists as a philosophically superior form of human existence. This reveals the colonial episteme of the theory of the subject and technology that is rooted in a sense of American exceptionalism that presumes the U.S. and capitalism are synonymous with moral progress and the sort of connectedness of human consciousness, as per the card on the this side and this one, which is a glorified argument of race science to justify capitalist ideology, which actively authorises the worst forms of genocide, makes environmental destruction inevitable. It's a Davis Satonis 16. The noosphere places is a thought about the kind of biosphere, geosphere, and theological progression, the concept of applicabilization of synth biosphere cannot cause the thinking something of the conscious noosphere where applicants to killer Western division of the killer mind from on the land frames overseas and enter the noosphere to the separate replicants by nature epistemic thoughts of colonial, which had to cause the anthropocene extension of the colonial logic to mask race difference by a genocide, forced integration, climate change, and to link turns the arguments within the evidence. Things like NGOs partner are partners of the quantification and the extraction of resources, returns that decide things like disaster relief are used in the Philippines to justify land grabs by private corporations. The privatization of common resources like water, which reveals that the substrate of technology is still a logistical system of racial capitalism. We aren't technology bad, however. We're a critique of the materialization of this historical regime of extraction through those forms of genocide, such as the racial census taking in Nazi Germany and the Philippines, that produced the impetus for quantification in places like IBM, where media has become coextensive with the genocidal product of social differentiation and produced colonized life, so their commodity or target, which means you should flip their extinction calculus and prioritize as a genocide as the quotidian extinction of ways of life itself. That means the semiology of capitalism and collective unconscious part of question of technology determines our relationship that each of us had and the way in which technology is materialized and used. The app solves or reclaims as the cognitive strike reclaims the means of technological production, transforming the via common distribution to extend the qualities of the world rather than disappear them. Capitalist innovation is bad. And a good IP requires we understand knowledge as a derivative wager, a financialization of knowledge, under which it locks in innovation into things like Viagra rather than environmental sustainability. The USSR proves that profit isn't key because they want things like the space race, but the technology of things like vaccines is always denied to the global south because the global south becomes a distributed product, something that can only be profited from but never are engaged with on equal terms. That's the William C. Beller evidence, which link turns the vast majority of this. The smart cities card could all answer with the urbanization card. They've read it's an impact. The urbanization evidence is super fucking racist. It literally says that our cities are decided to quote breeding grounds for crime, which reveals the genocidal nature by which technology become manifested within racial regimes of algorithmic surveillance. The evidence about megacities, it does not say the super cities will solve, but rather that they're just a part of an innovation of racial capitalism. Can only be unprofitable because oppressing human externalities globally and requires extraction, which is why smart cities only have become the worst forms of environmental unsustainability. Spelling 21. Innovation driven by productivity value, which the work of innovation and arbitrary human time, the infrastructure links on the competition to the capital car. Massive things about to the car, or the shutdown externalize the dance out of the machines from make every action wage character with the war and over the scheme, the liquidity cycles of the global volatility speculation continue out the can go to the border, capital wages, a decade of installing its computation space.
The next card, green technology, that was answered above. It caused a blood logistics where extraction caused massive animal destruction and wars to maintain it. And the public awareness argument and assure teaching the public about automobile doesn't fucking solve. It creates an individuated communicative subject that produces apathy and destructive root cause of corporations, unsustainability. That was answered above. The warrants is human ingenuity. Fuck that shit. And utopia failed. We're not utopian, but framing probably is more utopian. Noble means this evidence says there's a civil war if we try to transition. That's the status quo. The alternative to capitalism are being materialized everywhere but cracked down upon with the system of genocide, i.e. the retortionalization of violence via things like coups, sanctions, etc. They're subtended by the alliance infrastructure. Wars against migrants all prove that there's a dissent to their arguments about the NATO communist derivative. They haven't done to actualize these things like mutual aid. That's all these things. Transition wars fail. Don't underestimate the masses. And we're not degrowth. We're collective control that means production, which means we're vermo free growth. Or evidence about degrowth or assumes immediate degrowth, which is inevitable because financial crises is happening cyclically. We're probably not consumption. There's endless war. It's just the reterritorialization. I'm sure it's not Iraq, but the Middle East is still a war zone. No, they say extinction not waste. That was above. Evaluate genocide as extinction. Go to the dissent. Oh, also space colonization. Only the rich get off the rock. You should let the bourgeoisie die with the poor, because otherwise it's just fucking racism. Go to the dissent. The apps informatics disappears the social relations that are integral to the recursive of the ontology between episteme and ontology that mediates knowledge, enables the U.S. protective power that is a spectacle in the visualization of genocide and soul death under the terms of the by which we understand things like the dissent. The noosphere evidence specifically says that the noosphere should be consistent and coterminous with American empire, which reveals the problem via which, as they understand it, does not have a wretched fill-in argument anywhere in their evidence, and their card about leftists as a NATO ideology literally says that as domestic priorities in the U.S. overdetermine the capacity for a leftist NATO, which reveals the way in which their evidence is selectively manufactured and predetermined its usage by the collective unconscious, which means you should not understand computation behind their evidence as neutral, but rather as a tautological move to keep us playing their war game, which means our analysis of prerequisite to your ability to evaluate scenario planning in the first place. This also turns their revisionism a theory, stability, and the liberal order are active fictions of the world computer. That alliances are not a neutral architecture, but rather the reterritorialization and the reversibility of finance or war that endlessly oscillates between one and the other, which is why their attempt to frame places like Russia as a threat to validate American genocidal violence and so it produces this sort of oscillation in the informatic uptake of both pro and anti-war stances, which inculcates us into a crisis of agency and thought where we are forced to pick fascism and genocide either way, which justifies the ascendancy of fascism and it decide to frame it. Go to frame it. Debate may be a game, but it has a history. Planned debate is overrepresented. It's almost universal. The experience of social relations of this activity from prima facie debate phenomenon from the 80s conditioned out of the 90s cacophony of critical debate that we have been living since. These Newtonian debate, predictability is not determined by the topic, rather automated by the epistemic communities we are which we are trained to predict it, which is why critical debate has been predicting and preparing differently since their standards only submit community antagonism. Our argument index their theory of competition, competitive incentives don't overdetermine debate. They derive from the models of debate that we choose, why the critical teams can still choose to debate the resolution, even if K teams that they know wouldn't read framework or prove that alternative models can produce cooperative incentives and voluntary limits found in moments of study, community, research that exceed the tabulation of balance. The impact is the automation of fascism. Their theory upholds a financialized version of human nature, which is why we can uphold people like Neil Kosgau, Ron Biermeister as debate heroes, even as they defend Palantir and African child slavery for Nestle, which means that I'm not sure of all about means, but if they say we need one, and our counter model is that affirmative should make some noise while I'm at it. Counter interpretation, their interpretation plus our app, multi-model debate is predictable. Their target already assumes that they jump to choose the N-L-20. Critical reference to these logistical configurations, global venture capital financialized data heroes advocate for different the content answer the western of the undergirds militarism which used to be to analyze to also refuse the most that also proves that we meet that answers most of their standards as well as the arguments I did on case with all of our theory of information and derivative and debates the derivative market impact turn on the vast majority of their framework and class standards. It's a question of how we can actualize class to produce ethical subjectivities. There's a neural network data, their version of it. Class and iteration is the logic of machine learning that doesn't produce more knowledge, but rather refines the starting axiomatic assumptions like predictive policing algorithms. More data or computing power can't make them less racist, only more efficient at the racism, which turns class because they make us fantastically efficient war criminals capable of disappearing structural violence into technocracy rather than dwelling within a deliberative sense, which proves that multi-model debate is good because we sort of switch forms, not sides. The next argument is the banality of collapse. I did this on case. The CIA actively recruiting for debate. The proximity that each of us have to the operations of genocide and governance should outweigh any speculative skills arguments that we have. The model of instrumentality, a yes or no to the resolution, instrumental terms of fiat, means that we can never reckon with the ethical considerations via which the circulation of impacts as information exists, which inculcates us into a crisis of agency, which was on the dis side, I think. Cool. I'm ready for cross-text as soon as I get a drink of my coffee.
Sure.
Okay, I'm good whenever you are.
Great. The Newtonian debate DA, how does the app solve social relations in debate? Or how does
So-
your model, rather?
Our argument is more about the process via which you predict. Your version of prediction that is integral to the reading of framework as well as the standards of framework assumes that prediction comes from how we interpret the resolution, not from the epistemic communities that you and I are inculcated into, things like planned debate, critical debate, etc.
What makes the community norms matter more than the predictability of the resolution?
Because community norms determine how we predict. It determines what definitions we
Why?
look for, what we think when we see the word should, etc.
Like
Because-
think about how at the top of framework you said that the resolution was negotiated in advance, but you could never say that the definitions of all the words in the resolution were also negotiated
Okay,
in advance.
have you all
That's our
def-
argument.
Yeah, but have you all defined definitions?
Well, so that's our argument, is that the epistemic communities and the models via which we understand things like fiat are far more important than the definitions, because the definitions are secondary to our epistemic community. You cannot find predictability within a definition, and the ballot cannot resolve a model of debate based around a prediction
Sure.
of interpretations. The only chance that we have is finding a middle ground
Yeah.
in terms of the models of debate we use by recognizing that prediction is not determined.
The next
Fairness
question.
is not determined by the norm of fiat or a framework.
Okay, you're just saying the same thing. The multi-model debate means predictable. Why does that equal we meet? Like, why does
Well,
that mean that you meet our interpretation of it?
First off, this is an evidence from the topic paper, i.e. that negotiation in advance that you said determines fairness and predictability. And it says that understanding the way in which the Western self is constructed via NATO to justify financialization, logistical genocides is good, and that debate should be a space to analyze these knowledge practices.
Okay,
That is the affirmative. We were in the topic paper, which
let's
means
go on to
you
case.
should be fucking prepared, and it justifies the affirmatives model. If you go for a not we meet, we'll say that proves reasonability.
Let's go on to case. You've said that the alternative no links a lot of our cap offense because it's a collective seizure. How does the AF in its imagination convince people that this collective seizure is a desirable idea?
Well, so that's the question is, you think that the masses are people who are totally integrated into capital. We think that the world is constituted by a civil war. If you go to people in the world and you're like, this system fucking sucks, there is a crisis in institutions of democracy. There is a crisis in wars being fought in environments. People know that the world is fucked. It's only a question of, can we refuse the way in which community of capitalism inculcates us into a crisis of agency where we're forced to pick between genocides, to think instrumentally. When you ask us, how will we win? How do we get rid of US alliances? How do we fiat the government? That
Great.
deprioritizes is the question
that's
of
not what I asked.
should we? And the ethical subjectivity that can ignite the masses towards something
That's
better
fine.
when we withdraw our cognitive
okay.
labor and reinvest it in something better.
You've made arguments about why super cities cause environmental degradation. How does the AF solve super cities, or how does it restructure them in some way?
Well, so first off, I don't think the burden of the AF is to solve every single problem with the world. The burden of the AF
maybe.
is to win a relationship between what we do here in debate and the knowledge practices and those things. In that way, we've won that community of capitalism uptakes the sort of processes by which it renders the subject impossible.
Okay, I believe we have 10 minutes. I'll start prep. Okay. Yeah, I have 430. Just one card that I will be sending. The order is T and then case. But case is just the part that starts at the utopian fiat, like presumption debate, and not the disad part of case. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I get the order one more time?
Yeah. T and then case, but start case at the no utopian fiat part.
Sorry, give me like 15 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm good to go.
Is everyone else good? Cool. All right. Our interpretation is that topical asks must defend hypothetical limitations of mutual defense pacts implemented by the use of G. There are two impacts. First is fairness. Debate may have implications beyond being mere logistic game, but at its core relies on equitable engagement by both sides to exist, which makes fairness a prereq to all the reasons I think debate is valuable, because in order to have meaningful dialogue about deconstructing capitalism, both sides need to have a reasonably distributed balanced preparation. It also outweighs their impacts because it undergirds all arguments evaluation. In order to conclude that the AF outweighs fairness, the arguments must be fairly validated, which proves that maintaining competitive equity is intrinsically viable, and it proves that they can't weigh the AF against T, because T is a question of whether or not we should be expected to debate the AF in the first place. Second is clash. The process of comparing strategies with a well-prepared opponent encourages argumentative refinement as we weigh the costs and benefits of our political positions across multiple debates. That exposure to third and fourth level testing forces debaters to hone their research and become critical thinkers, which are fundamental prerequisites to being movement builders, which outweighs because the skills are inculcated to the potential to generate massive societal change. However, even if we only makes us marginally better decision makers, we still outweigh because the process of argumentative refinement allows us to better discern the truth and make ethical choices. The value of this is proven by 1AC cross-sex because both sides agree that the process of negotiation over desirable political strategies is what debate is about. The first argument is about the sort of history of debate. A lot of their examples about why debate is unethical are not referendums on topicality. The PRL being racist is not a reason why the res is unethical, and the fact that people have utilized fiat or weaponized fiat in the past is not a reason why the notion that debating about USFG should is intrinsically bad. Endorsing the AF's interp does not cause the PRL or any of these other racist structures to vanish. You have to question whether or not their model can actually solve their impacts on the history of debate stuff. The Newtonian, the Newton dissent about predictions being different. The first, this is the point. T is a question of whose interpretations of the words in the res are more conducive to a year's worth of debate. T is a negotiation, not an imposition, which is demonstrated by the fact that this debate is a discussion on what the debate should look like, not a monologue. Second, topic process excluding some communities cannot be solved by voting affirmative. That's a structural condition external to what occurs in this debate. Third, not debating the topic because you don't like it is much worse, which justifies counter no topic because policy schools can just say that they'd rather talk about space elevators or phytoplankton, which magnifies all their dissets to T. The next argument is that competition doesn't overdetermine everything. Well, competition might not overdetermine every decision made by every team, but in general, debate is structured by this model. Maybe Wake would use their model productively, but policy schools would certainly weaponize it to monopolize the burden of preparation against the negative. For instance, there's no reason that why MSU can't just break the phytoplankton AF in the next debate under their interpretation. They say bad people in debate. Our model doesn't create them. First, it's non-unique. Individual debates don't shape your subjectivity. People will inevitably do bad stuff about debate if they want to, regardless of what types of arguments we read. We are to hedge this ad in this debate, yet advocate against military primacy and true presence in other debates. However, reading reading it does serve as a vehicle for understanding the side which is intrinsically valuable. Second, we solve best. Our interpretation forces research into proposals that teach self-reflexivity that weeds out the ideological roots of violent people, but their interpret makes this worse because it elevates the strategic value of insulating your ideas from criticism. Third, topical version and switch side solve. Even if they can't directly solve the they prove a debate is possible over their theory, which is their internal link to making debate better. The TVA is to end all 4 topical alliances. We're not going for the hedge dissent necessarily, but the Beller evidence does say that demonstrate that large swaths of the 1AC said that the alliance system itself is a mechanism by which the U.S. sort of encodes information and it surveils other countries to ensure that they're doing what it wants. They can read the app and they can read a topical app that I just described and justify it by reading a criticism of the ways in which the U.S. alliance system is sort of unethical intrinsically and needs to be eliminated because of the manifestations and because of the ways in which it manifests empire abroad. Secondly, switch side debates solve the notion that their authors, the notion that all critical theory suggests that state action or state calls to reduce violence through the state are bad is homogenizing, and on that homogenizing and essentializes the theory. There's no reason why they have to read this particular theory on both sides all the time, so they can read a more moderate, a little more liberal version of the AF on the affirmative, and then read a more radical version on the negative, and that produces the best debate. It's because it's about liberalism versus radical reformism, which creates the best sort of political subjects that the 1AC cross-sections said are desirable. The role of the judge argument, it's about the role of the judge is solely determined who does the better debating. Anything else is arbitrary because in order to conclude that their role of the judge is more desirable than ours, you have to conclude that they out-debated us on the desirability of the role of the judge debate anyways. So there's a self-serving thing and begs the question in the first place. The counter-interpretive multi-model links to all or offense versus limits the AF allows anything tangentially related to alliances to be topical. The threshold is just that the AF has to claim to try to be topical or try to be a multi-model or in the direction of what the topic hypothetically could be, which is arbitrary and therefore allows one to see that critique the concept of alliances of the state, do rhetorical analysis of resolution, and say their critique ends defense pacts. Use alliances as a metaphor for social interactions like white supremacy. Connect any critical theorists like Baudrillard, Racan, Wilson, Edelman, or others to alliances, or say that global alliance commitments are analogous to debate and talk about that. All that explodes the research burden. We have some backfiles, but there's a substantial difference in prep skews debate towards the F and circumvents direct clash and nuanced deliberation. Second, to dissent is ground. There are 2 internal links versus concessionary ground. Asks unrelated to the resolution mechanism, undercut all stable ground because they can shift their advocacy to spike out of DA and K links, which is exactly what happened on the hedge dissent because they're like, nah, we don't really defend reduced alliance commitments. We just tease a prior question because you have to win our and we have to beat the sort of epistemic or research model is bad before we get access to the dissent, which proves the F can always make the random prior questions that are unpredictable come before dissents or substance. That makes her terrible to our options and allows them to maximize their research and manipulate the balance. Perhaps second is predictable ground. Even if their model sets a limit that allows negative research, the limit isn't predictable, which obviates its value. The negative expects the topic to be of governmental limitations on defense facts, which means they're probably oriented towards arguments like the security or imperialism. Okay, their interp nullifies that preparation by shifting to the terms of debate towards an unpredictable ground. The next counter interp, U plus us links to all or offense above, but it also justifies counter interp no topic because any team can say counter interp plus RF because it's arbitrary. No neural network. This iteration is not the logic of the machine. They have no ed for this, and they also invite iteration because it said that because 1AC Crossix said that comparing political strategies is good. Iteration is good anyways. Procedurally limited topics, facility complex argument development, open topics in the age of datafication reinforces self-referential patterning and limited linear thinking through overload growth where indicating that exclusion of publication creates too many positions, too many arguments, it's become impossible to read everything. This is serious consequences. The proliferation of surveillance studies, game studies, code studies, all are valuable. I mean, academics create an endlessly self-referential closed system of citations, numerically predictable circular tissue of references are one less likely to produce insightful research. Any investigation is likely to open up an entire history of debates, but who can afford the time and energy? One tends to select sources according to an understanding of research is a conversation with difference. One selectively finding these ideas that are already in line with what one already seems to be true. Complexity goes out the door. This also presumes that our skills are categorically always bad, which makes no sense. The bad people in debate above demonstrates that whether or not people use skills in debate poorly is not a reflection on the skills that we accumulate from a debate, rather than a reflection on those people individually. For instance, Karl Rove did not become a bad person because he was a debater, but rather because he was just a bad person and utilized the skills generated in debate to do bad things. However, the uniqueness question for this definitively goes negative because the bad people have monopoly on the levers of power now. So giving them more skills doesn't matter because they already control the mechanisms by which the world works, which is obviously the entirety of the 1AC's inherency claim. There's only a risk that giving good debaters, good people in debate, the equal skills can allow them to sort of push back against the negative influences enacted by people like Karl Rove, TBA and Switchside also obviously necessarily solve the normal network DA. If their argument is that we need to inject sort of radical scholarship in order to sort of break down normative iteration, our model obviously allows that as well, which is above on the bad people DA. The CIA dissent first was this specific thing literally happened because Tab put ads for the CIA on their webpage. Obviously doesn't get solved by voting affirmative affirmative or by changing the models of debate, but also answer the broader claim. Skills being portable does not necessitate being bad people. That was above. We don't have to join the CIA. People who want to join the CIA would join the CIA regardless of whether or not they were in debate. And our interpretation does not push them to joining the CIA or make it more likely that they would do so. Case. At the top, the negative presumption, they don't alter the world's computers or computers programs in any ways that can outweigh procedural, because when I see cross standards said that this is debate. First, utopian fiat is bad fiats over solvency, which focus the debate over alternative econ arrangements, messes with the uniqueness of dissets. How do they eliminate the informatic system? How can you go beyond strapping folks into the claim that the system is racist, let alone how communications deconstruct platform capitalism? Invitation of Emory judges to withdraw our labor is just words. Wick has yet to explain how submitting an online ballot in tab room in a Zoom debate somehow overcomes policing through algorithms throughout the U.S. or mass policing that causes crisis escalation, let alone mass genocide and destabilization. At worst, this proves that ballot proximity means you should vote negative, because the ballot can resolve an issue, an instance of procedural inequity, but it cannot resolve their impact. Second, no spillover. And it attempts to avoid having to answer any offense, just make a statement. Wick has just reduced their solvency to zero, and has no ballot key warrant. They don't solve the unconscious opinions of people in debate, because one debate obviously doesn't shape your subjectivity. The ballot only signifies a win or loss in remediating an unfair debate, which outweighs since any other impact does not depend on the ballot to solve the harm. The transition stuff, it fails. Fulfilling the jargon of cognitive production is not very compelling. The psychopaths will just take over, not the communist movements of plan economic downtrends, because people can scapegoat minorities in foreign countries. The 70s and 80s prove that people don't look inwards and think about their consumption patterns, but they externalize their anxiety onto a foreign others. This is Monty Bot. Second, you should overcorrect negative on the sustainability debate, because you're predisposed to think the technological and the economy are unsustainable. Give me a sec for water, and then I'll be good.
Roberto, you have to unmute. Oh,
I did. Real quick before we start cross-ex, I'm just going to go to the restroom.
Oh, okay.
I'll do that too. That's a good idea.
Ugh. See what Twitter has for me today. I'm joking.
Yeah, probably a dumpster fire anyways.
Literally.
Should we check on the boat in the Suez? How's that going?
I'm more interested in what's up with this judging thing. Like, is the NDT committee gonna respond?
They will leave no comment, I promise.
Oh, I figure. But like, I live for the drama. If they do, that would be fun.
That's fine. Like, yeah.
And you hear
Sorry about the wait. I'm back.
As am I.
Cool. Ready for cross-ex?
Give me a second. Now I am.
Cool. Top of the 2NC. We said that debate has historically changed and pluralized its practices and should again. You said because the PRL is bad doesn't mean we are. What is the connection between those two arguments?
Oh, well, I interpreted your history of debate argument to mean that framework is tied to sort of necessarily.
Why do you assume that someone talking about the history of framework would be talking about why it's racist?
I read the thing, I listened to what the 2AC had to say about
Why is that where your brain goes?
Because I thought that the argument that that's just the rhetoric and language that you used. I thought that you were making an offensive argument.
The language. It seems like you're saying that the rhetoric I'm using is part of an epistemic community that is different from yours, that tends to make a certain kind of argument. Why isn't this the exact way in which we are socialized into the technologies of debate?
Well, I would presume that you think that our interpretation of key is bad. I mean, if you disagree with that argument, then feel free to.
Okay. Let's talk about the next argument you made. You said that debating liberalism v. radical reformism creates good political subjects. Later on the flow, you said we cannot become good political subjects or bad political subjects because people are already good or bad. Which one is it?
No. So my argument is that there's no chance that debating will make you a worse person. However, there is the chance that debating can cause you to unlock a perspective that you hadn't seen.
So debate can only make us better, but the debating about liberalism, why does that make us good political subjects? Let me try this a better way.
Well, if you're right that liberalism is bad, then teams that present arguments as to why liberalism is bad will win a lot of the time. And the process of researching this sort of argument will cause the broad majority of debaters to understand or at least experience the perspectives of
the research practices that we engage in can change our orientations.
Over a year, but not
political horizons.
What?
They change our political horizons.
Yeah, but not towards a negative way, not in a negative light, because we think that it is true that the best.
I think that's cap, but whatever. You said that you can read a K to justify a hypothetical plan like the TVA. Then you said that critiquing your disad in this debate via our critique was bad because it spikes out of the disad. Which is it?
Wait, so if you read a topical plan,
if we read a topical plan with a criticism of the topic, you read a disad, we criticize the disad and implicate the knowledge practice of the disad.
The problem is that the implication of the criticism of the disad is that there's no link to the disad.
We did not say there was no link to the disad.
The level of the app is operating on.
We did not say there was no link to the disad. We did not say there was no link to the disad. Whatever. Ground. Do plan teams not rate squirrely apps to get out of disads or counter plans?
Okay. Obviously, the politics disad and stuff like that is concessionary.
So
on our
all ground is concessionary.
No. I don't agree with that. There are certain disads and certain Ks, like the imperialism K and the militarism K, that all apps on our interp have to defend, regardless of what they say. Obviously, concessionary ground exists too.
Sure,
but it's not only concessionary.
Okay.
Are we taking prep? What's happening? Muted.
Forgot I was muted. Anyway, I'm sending it out right now. The order is the disad case. Case will be just the offense part that was labeled in the 1NC. So starting at the top and going up to, but not the utopian fiat argument. Okay, I see one judge. I see two judge. I see three judge. And I see a pause. And now I see Wake. Okay, perfect. The dissad we're not going for. The noosphere is imperialist argument is kind of ridiculous. The noosphere is just a politics, a planetary politics, i.e. the ethics of what the entire globe should adopt. Those things are good because they create common understandings of what is good and bad, which is crucial for action. The fact that we read a card that says that American value systems are desirable in the abstract in comparison to Russia and China is not imperialist, but rather a cost-benefit analysis, which no links their argument. But we're not going for the dissad, which solves all their offense or any argument they might cross-apply to case. They haven't made an explicit comparison or an application to capitalism. The case offense. Top level extinction outweighs. 1 is irreversibility. Death denies agency for positive experience. Everyone which outweighs on mere scope. 2 is ethics. Killing everyone for ethics justifies genocide. Nukes are independently painful and disproportionately harm minority and marginalized populations. Wars are the worst form of structural violence and justify domestic militarism. 3, consequentialism is good and inevitable. They can't simultaneously win their impact and beat extinction outweighs any impact comparison that makes less than a cost-benefit analysis, which is inherently utilitarianism. The genocide in comparison to extinction only makes sense insofar as if we ignore future generations. That's life-denying and paternalistic. Extinction should be evaluated as a categorically distinct event because it denies the possibility of humanity of all, and it turns genocide because the process of extinction is slow and painful, similar and on a larger scale than that of the genocides they described. The first is the warming turn dropped. Big data is key to global surveillance. They conceded that the key to solve warming, and that warming causes extinction that harms marginalized populations first. The global south is first hit with rising sea levels and ignored by the global north at first, which means that we should do all we can to prevent the effects of extinction, even if capitalism is imperfect. The second piece of offense is the space call turn. Conceded extinction events now that only space call solves, and that market incentives are key to actualize it. That implicates terminal impact uniqueness, because if there are extinction events now, then humanity cannot survive without capitalism's continuance. Extinction events coming now. Growth is key. Average 16. Extinction event is coming down. Asteroid can change the magnetic force of rising temperature. All events are. We cannot escape. 5 extinction events have occurred. We're due for another. We must move to space. We need 2 things: travel there, survive. Luckily, space exploration and space deployment to space process as cheap and fast as possible. Every second of delay is worth 10 to the 29th potential human life. Spectrum. 3 negative trees being irreversibly degraded into entry on a cosmic scale. The resources in advanced civilization we have used loss of potential human lives. The effect on total seems greater for actions that accelerate tech development and any other action advanced tech that at least a colonization is just 1 second earlier amounts to bringing about more than 10 to the 29th human lives that would not otherwise have existed. The argument that it's just the rich is wrong. Maybe Elon Musk goes first because he made it, but there's an incentive to make it universal. Space call increases cosmopolitanism. Bates 17 cosmologies. Mars could be the key to solving issues on Earth. New tech to previously inextractable problems could be developed on Mars, or the process becoming multiplanetary will have unifying effects on humanity, helping those that understand as a member of a single species, advancing those into the cosmos. Overview effect is empirically proven. Overview Institute 8 astronomers from any culture telling us that they became such a bitch in the overview effect refers to experience of seeing the reality of Earth and space national boundaries vanish. Conflicts that divide us become less important than the need to create a planetary society becomes obvious and imperative. The third piece of offense is the city's turn. Resource charges cause extinction. Existence will depend on balance of essential resources. Unsustainable urbanization overwhelms Earth's capacity and prompts a resource crisis. That's crib. Biodiversity loss causes extinction. Turns all impacts for 16. Repercussions of biodiversity, severe climate change, or new conflict. F is incontrovertible. The ecosystems undergo abrupt irreversible shifts, even putting into catastrophic civilization, widespread unrest, economic instability, loss of human life far more quickly than climate change, particularly destructive of threat multiplier, exacerbate conflicts, threat full of fuel terrorism, and existential threat. The argument that it's racist is kind of silly. Obviously, it's bad to blame the people that are migrating for the effects of cities, and that breeding grounds for crime is not a good framework. But that doesn't change the fact that warming and environmental factors are causing an increase towards urbanization. Large population centers do have increased risks of poverty, which is the internal link to breeding grounds for crime. It's not paternalistic. It's just historical correlation. The city's environmental turn was taken down in cross-ex. The 1AC did not have a method in order to solve for the inevitable development of these large cities, which means that there's no chance that they can suck there's no chance that the app can solve the city sucking environmental resources and increasing metals. Only making them efficient can solve. The nose for bad argument was on the dissad, but NGA's benefits outweigh the cost. Conceded offense increases early warning for natural disasters and humanitarian crisis, which turns genocides. The trend is upward. Stats are misleading. Just because we can see more instances of malpractice because of transparency measures doesn't mean that they're actually making things worse. The next argument is the app is in position against tech. Maybe not explicitly, but the app positions itself explicitly against the world computer. That collapses big data. Big data is good because cities use the cloud to promote environmentally sustainable urbanization. It integrates perspectives to deal with sustainability. It's a large-scale data resource for climate action. Urban living is expected to increase, which will strain resources. City administrators need data for efficient energy efficiency, pollution, and biodiversity management. That's collapses all of the capitalist system, which it accesses all of our offense. I'll prohibit the 1 hour shift to we don't do anything / ethics first. The 1AC has inextricably tied themselves to the opposition to the world computer. If we win, that the result of shifting labor as per Crossex is bad, then obviously it's not a good idea to work towards that goal or to imagine it. The last part is just the sustainability debate. The growth is broadly sustainable. Bailey, 16 global fertility rates have been accelerated and population will peak. It's unlikely biophysical limits will be stated communities that peak farmland water species to decline below 1970. The U.S. has achieved absolute decoupling for 53 commodities. Now new manufacturing will generate reports for revolution. Their battle assumes fossil fuels demand for energy to double. The entire world needs to be supplied by 6,000 plants through factory actors. Would supply for thousands of years. Financialization is empirically denied. Kaplan, 17 companies are criticized for purchasing in the short run. Corporate leaders deliver returns while underinvesting. The criticisms are not new. There's a very little long-term incentive consistent with the predictions of critics. Critics have not changed 35 years. Today is the long-term. Business should be performing poorly. That is unequivocally not the case. Profits are near all-time highs. The uptrend began around the time the financial sector aggressive change. Strong performance is inconsistent with criticism of corporate governance. The Reinhardt card also answers the final card, the final argument, which is just about Beller the Beller evidence, which says that there aren't tech pessimisms to respond to the Reinhardt evidence, but also drop several warrants of the impact turned to the app in response to Beller's criticisms of innovation. Our brains are wired to uncover positives independently. Digital synchronity can correct racism systems through human ingenuity, reduces poverty, ensures health care, reduces an external impact of structural violence. That's Reinhardt. The 2AC card is not an innovation. The last argument is that strikes solve the collective mindset. That goes against everything that the 1NC said about our aggregation towards tech. Even if they're right that in the long term we would be convinced, the short term would mean that people would see a massive decrease in quality of life and elect public officials that favor growth.
Okay, we'll take prep. We have, let me check the chat.
9:26.
Sweet, thank you.
that last arc.
Stop prep at 3:30. Cool. Tessa, could you send out the card for me from that last debate?
Yeah, I already got it. Queued up.
Okay. Since Tessa sent out the card, once I get confirmation that everyone has it, I'll be good. The order, as you can probably assume, will be case. I'm just going to follow the block order. It's like that weird defense shit first, and then the offense, and then framework. All is empty.
I know, right?
I just saw a thumbs up from Al.
Well, I haven't gotten it yet. Sorry.
Okay, so a thumbs up from Tommy. Matt and Emory, just let me know when y'all got it.
Did you get it, Henry?
I just got it.
Okay, give me a second. Ah, okay.
Okay. The world computer is a historically materialized system that seeks to quantify everything and financialize life itself. It establishes a recursive feedback loop between ontology and epistemology that automates thought through their collective unconscious and naturalizes information as an essential aspect of the world, ignoring that information is only a derivative on a reality that it's itself historically materialized. You should understand their claims to truth as a function of this recursive relationship seeks to confirm the trajectory of financialization as objective and inevitable, which means you should decide what futures we're speculating on before evaluating their evidence. The impact is the ongoing genocide and intensification of crises that result from the codification of social difference as a evaluation. This process structures meaning and disappears human sociality to secure the blood-soaked circuits of abstraction that are driving the world towards collapse. This rises above the level of simple capitalism or hegemony and points to an interconnected system riddled with internal contradictions that impede the resolution of its crisis, contrary to the myopic insistence on theoretical sustainability. Debate is deeply imbricated in the machine of abstraction that hedges on the volatility of the global order, which is why our 1AC theory is also offensive framework. Voting app is a bet against alliances and the capitalist derivative. It's an affirmation of a cognitive stripe that withdraws from the endless recursivity of information that relies on extracting your surplus value to function. This refusal redirects our cognitive labor towards exploring the yet unknown but certainly more ethical possibilities that are foreclosed by the demands of instrumentality. The presumption debate only we have made an argument about the burden of solvency. We don't have to vote that prove that. We don't have to vote that. We don't have to prove that voting app solves every impact. All we have to win is that our method is an ethical intervention into the knowledge economy debate that enables the possibility of something better, which means that then you should affirm it. Their model of debate cannot solve the ongoing crisis. It's not people doing things. It's talking about other people doing things. We're going for the field double line of the app. Your battle has no correlation with alliance policy, but it can orient our cognitive labor towards something more ethical. The transition more arguments. First, they underestimate the ability of the masses to produce revolution, but also they concede the argument that the transition is happening now, evidenced by all the global crises that we pointed out. Their arguments about psychopaths are non-unique because it's happening right now. People like Trump and Putin, etc. Their arguments about extinction, genocides are also irreversible. Voting affirmative does not cause extinction, but it can mitigate your participation in genocide, which reframe our ability to access those impacts through proximity, which means they can't access them. They to the question of whether or not white people survive the global north through things like space colonization is not a society worth saving because it's one that is produced by race science. Their arguments about the warming term don't make any sense because surveillance doesn't solve global warming. They just have an internal link argument, but not an argument how renewables and other things could solve it. Reverse causing, which I'll get to a little bit later. Their arguments about sort of neuroplasticity are racist. It's the new sphere is the status quo of capitalism and hegemony. It's a form of race science that justifies genocide by sort of eviscerating the sort of destruction of other forms of living and assumes that the sort of reason of rationality, the Enlightenment thought, and the way that it's been elevated by places like the United States is the sort of evolutionary peak of humanity, which is what justifies indigenous genocide, interventions, coup, etc., which is uniquely bad and a sort of epistemological reason for you to vote them down in this debate. Their space cult arguments, they argue about how we're a single species and the base evidence is wrong because the financialization of life and the codification of social difference produces race science that mitigates that, which means that the overview effect doesn't solve the arguments about diversity law, about diversity loss don't solve and get turned by the rare earth mining because rare earth mining for renewables is a politics of sacrifice that has already killed millions while accelerating climate change, biodiversity loss, and deforestation. That's only 14. Renewable energy reconstituted fossil fuel amounts core going into solar panels, wind, massive mines provide batteries, 1.2 million is already down for labor. The mines, wind, solar, sun usable, that's generating power biomass is the purpose of the planet. Many no longer plans suicide. The planet is going to double, triple, 10 times more than promote. Getting off fossil fuels, the planet and climate change being destroyed even faster than preventing climate change. The next argument is that they're not racist because it doesn't chase that climate change creating air. That's not an argument to our answer to our fucking argument. Their equivalence of a party of poverty and crime is exactly the argument because computational capitalism equates poverty to blackness because that is a sort of structure of the differentiation of social difference and the financialization of life itself, which is racist as fuck and a reason to vote them down. They say the F doesn't solve large cities, but they don't either. Also, their use of poverty and crime is a sort of animality metaphor with the question of the breeding grounds. It also proves that information is not neutral, which means you shouldn't evaluate their inclination to prime you to believe that everything is sustainable. They said the new sphere is bad, the new sphere being bad is outweighed by solving violence, but they haven't proved they solve. A conceded vaccine debate proves that innovation under capitalism is uniquely bad because it only stratifies social difference by giving it to the global north, not the global south, which causes a sort of intervention to produce resources. They said the athlete explicitly against big data, which you can see. We're not saying that big data is bad, but rather our relationship to big data is mediated by computational capitalism that needs to be repaired through a cognitive strike, which is why a big data tends to be used for bad things. Their argument about how growth is sustainable doesn't answer arguments about financialization, which I explained above, and their argument about how the financialization impact is denied. The evidence doesn't talk about financialization in the sense of our evidence says that corporate profits are sustainable, which isn't our fucking argument. Good framework. Oh, their arguments about how brains are wired toward techno-pessimism have no warrants. We have a much better explanation. They just say that general pessimism applies, but that's not enough given we're winning our theory. Yeah, framework. We're winning a meta theory of predictability that non-uniques. Their offense magnifies the 2AC impact to their model. The neural network DA iteration doesn't produce more knowledge, only refines the starting assumption of their model that non-uniques are impact in terms of because their model can only make us more efficient war criminals that can disappear violence with technocratic discourse. Even if we all don't become Karl Rove, we all become participants in genocide with no hope to change that reality because we become cynics. If we win that clash is not a value neutral technology, then we win this debate. All their offense assumes that what we debate on cannot shape our political horizons or the possibility of ethical orientation, which is patently false when they make arguments about why debating liberalism versus radical reformism is good. That implicitly concedes that content matters. Only difference that we impact turn the idea of debating liberalism. So it's just a question of which clash is good. The banality of collapse that their model of circulation desensitizes us and renders global violence, but all foreclosing a more ethical relationship to the world. Debate debates proximity to violence and genocide outweighs any risk of their offense. Global South becomes a product that's exported into violent power fantasy. The CIA is recruiting for debate, which is the probability of the portability of the model is the worst case scenario. Even if we all do become war criminals, we all become complicit and conform to the system of the racial unconscious. It's much easier to come out a debate worse than you came into. It's the NDT impact calculus wins debate. The block didn't have any on our impactors. If we win them, then it means none of their offense matters because we access a vastly larger magnitude. This also proves that we should switch forms over switching sides. Our model of iteration replicates the violence of machine learning because it turns that dirty data into dirty conclusions that are implemented because we have a naive faith in information's neutrality. Also, our dissets turn the topic versus the after attempts at instrumentally capturing our radical thoughts of labor for the world computer, which we've impact turn. Even if they win the TVA capture some of the it doesn't solve dissets of their models. I'll do some of the overview, also some from the Tweety overview here. Even if debate is game, we shouldn't neglect its history. Plan debate exists because there was a need for fiat as a mechanism for articulating alternative futures. Even if it's predictable, what matters is that utility of the present. The thesis of the 1AC, they can see that instrumentality is now an obstacle to alternative political imaginations because they're a tool for prefiguration by the world computer. The topic here proves that multi-model debate is predictable. It already exists and produces great critical debates. So framework allows your socialization to prime you against it. They misrecognize the origin of predictability as a topic and not their epistemic community, which is why their stance is reactionary. If alliances are made real through computational capitalism, then we're definitely a reduction in our common models. The app should make some noise. The theory of competition doesn't apply to our model because we encourage cooperative incentives and voluntary limits that arise from a communal ethos and centuries of anarchist thought on voluntary association, which improves argumentation and community in debate. Critical teams still debate the topic. We don't read framework and we don't experience the research burden arguments. They go for the say that the TVA doesn't analyze, but it doesn't solve their standards because it's still because the team still gets a frame of dissets. They say that concessionary ground is bad. I answered that above in the defense debate there. Stuff about how we don't all turn to bad people. I also answered that. They say policy teams will abuse. They do that anyways. It's non-unique. Oh yeah.
4:30.
Is it my thing? All right, we'll start. Okay. T case. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up from everyone if we're good? All right. No impact defense of fairness means you should presume it's an intrinsic good. Debate might not just be a game, but actualizing its benefits require acknowledging its fundamentally competitive nature. Both sides agree that debate should be about discussion of strategies, but negation is critical to this because the asked political alternative needs to be put in dialogue with both prepared opportunity cost. That process is only possible if the negative has ground to stand on in pre-round preparation and proves fairness leaning towards all the reasons they think debate is valuable, because their model makes it impossible to have the cooperative dialogue they think is good. They drop to T implies they don't get to weigh the app, because this is a question of whether or not we should have to have this debate in the first place. So I don't really need to answer a lot of case stuff. The neural networks has said first thing I want to clarify is that I know cross-sex is a little awkward on the subjectivity shift stuff, but what I was trying to get is an argument about scope. No single debate shapes your subjectivity because the vast wealth of experience outside of this round is massively outweighs. We agree a year's worth of research might have influence, but that is irrelevant because of the scope of the ballot. Ballot proximity matters. Voting neg can alleviate a single instance of procedural inequity, but voting F does not implement the research model that even solves their offense, so impacts categorically outweigh the neural network dissent because there's no correlation between voting F and solving their impact. However, if you think that you should think about debate as a process, about T as a process of debating across a model or debates across a year, our interp is better. Yes, debate over year might shape your subjectivity. However, we are the only ones reading evidence about how the subjectivity shift will happen. The Goodman evidence says that the process of comparing political alternatives is good because it breaks down dogma and causes self-reflexivity, which directly clashes with the way that they've sort of described debates about information, because debates do not reify already perceived understandings of what the world is, but rather cause us to be self-reflexive and sort of break down our presupposed assumptions about how the world operates. You should overcorrect massively negative here because they have no evidence about how argumentation actually affects our psyche. We are reading evidence from psychological and cognitive surveys, which obviously is far more qualified. TVA and Switchlight also have a lot of defense to the sort of neural networks. They said the first end all alliances does solve vast swaths of the app. A lot of their cards, like Beller and the quotes they pulled from the 2NC, all demonstrate that the app is in large agreement with the fact that alliances are a networking manifestation in which the U.S. is able to monopolize its control over the globe and sort of export colonialism. Obviously, an app can read these Beller cards as a justification for why the alliance commitments broadly should be abolished, which solves the neural network dissent, because we do not have to have every debate be about hegemony, good, bad. In fact, that is just those are bad arguments, but that is not the reason why reading a plan is bad, because you can read good plans like the ones we described. Switch side solves any residual offense. They have no AF key warrant, which means that having debates about whether or not the alliance commitments should be resolved through the state or rather extra politically is desirable, because they've conceded that their strategy is not necessarily the only perfect strategy, but rather needs to be put in contest with other political alternatives, like other political alternatives. The notion it's just that this particular alternative needs to be done on the negative, because doing it on the app monopolizes prep away from the negative. It makes it impossible to debate the CIA exportation argument. No, first, there's no correlation between debating a plan and joining the CIA. Nothing about reading a topical plan requires that you read the hedge dissent, or requires that you read the hedge app, which means that the sort of the good debates that I've described above solve a lot of their offense. TVA and Switchside solve too, because we should have good ethical debates about the best ways to break down U.S. imperialism, not necessarily debates about whether or not we should about the particular manifestation in which hedge should manifest itself. They say switch forms, not content. Our interp solves all the reasons why form is good. T is not a restriction on form, but rather just on content. They can still perform however they want in the app. They can read a poem, read in different language, etc. All of which demonstrates that they can still use the resolution as a jumping point off of exploration and form. It's just that T is a moderate restriction on content, which solves our offense and is a necessary middle ground. The multi-model debate stuff, I'm not sure why they think this is predictable. The topic debate paper just says that here are some possible angles critical teams might explore the topic. It does not say that this is a good model of debate, and begs the question of the topicality debate, because if we win our offense, then it demonstrates that this particular perspective on debate that the topic paper has taken is not desirable, and ours is more desirable. They've considered our massive case list for links to solvency. First, the just of apps that critique the concept of alliances in the state. There's no cap on what it means means to reduce alliance commitments or use the resolution as a jumping off point. Doing rhetorical analysis of the resolution could work. They could use the resolution as an analogy to the debate. They can use the resolution as an analogy to the debate, and they drop that multi-model debate justifies teams saying that they don't like the res and just want to talk about something else altogether, which means that which causes policy teams to monopolize preparation by reading the phytoplankton of space elevators app, and it means that debates under their interp are not the ethical ones they want, but rather just obscene random debates about just the smallest, most squirrely stuff possible. And yes, this might happen to some extent under our interpretation, but our interp limits the scope of it because it creates a few general assumptions that AFS must defend in every debate. The next argument about how there's no theory of competition. Maybe Wake FH doesn't necessarily want to have competition, but the broad majority of teams do, which is proven by the fact that teams break new apps on each other all the time. This just gets magnified into a world in which there's no stable limit for the topic because teams will just break the most obscene stuff that there's no defense to, like the phytoplankton app I just described above. So yeah, you need to assume the worst case scenario, not the best case one, because that's what teams and Squirrel 2 ways will run to. The TVA does solve our disads. I'm not sure why they don't think it does. If this turns into a concessionary ground argument, then obviously this concessionary ground under our interp, but our interp requires that AFS say that the U.S. should manipulate alliance commitments, which means that there's links to the notion that the U.S. can ever make itself an ethical actor, which causes links to the imperialism and Orientalism, etc. There's links about our interactions with Russia, China, the Philippines, etc., which are obviously not concessionary ground because they're core assumptions about the app. It also our interp only requires that you have preparation for 4 actors and links to 4 actors, which is obviously reasonable, and you know the app has to defend one of them. Case page. No spillover beyond this round. They have no explanation for why the ballot solves. Maybe the ballot creates more ethical subjects in the sense that the 1AC is an ethical research paradigm, but that does not mean that you should vote on topicality because they don't get to weigh the case versus the F, and there's no impact to ethical research if it doesn't spill out anyways, which means that you should presume at best that the 1AC is just like a small injection that doesn't result in anything larger.
3:30.
Okay, start.
Okay. Cool. I'm gonna run to the bathroom because I've had to go for like a while and haven't. I'll be back. When I do get back, the order is gonna be case and then framework.
Where's my mask?
I don't know where'd you put it.
I don't know. So I'm asking you.
Check. Building. Probably not.
If I see someone, I'll run.
I'll do a quick search for it while you're gone.
Found your mask. Your mask is right there, by the way, for the future.
Thank you so much. Was it there all along?
No, it was on the floor.
Okay. Order.
I'm sorry, I can't hear anything. Let me check my audio for a second.
Can everyone else hear us?
Yeah, we can all hear you.
Okay. Let's wait for Tommy then.
Okay. Ciao.
Those in the order that I'll be doing.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
we
we
can
can.
hear you.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
What was the order?
Case and then framework.
Okay.
The world computer is a historically materialized machine of capitalism. It is a feedback loop that ties epistemology to ontology. Information is not neutral, but rather the performative derivative of the social relations of the world that are built upon genocidal violence. These materialize a collective unconscious, i.e., the thinking machine of society that automates thought, thinking through each and every one of us to confirm the trajectory of financialization and genocide, and no objective and inevitable or the outgrowths of things like liberalism or hegemony, which is proven by the articulation of technology, both in this debate where they have continuously had slippages from the race science of the noosphere to the breeding grounds of crime. Each of these things reveal the way in which information that can orient us towards a collective unconscious that is rooted within a colonial framework. The articulation
of framework is some natural and neutral technology and inaugurated within regimes of clash and fairness reveals the way in which they disappear the social relations of this activity, just as they disappear the knowledge economy of the world that gives them these race sciences. The community operates with the history, which means conceding the vast majority of the case. They've dropped a few key arguments that over-determine fairness often because our thesis outweighs and turns the vast majority of the underlying assumptions of their framework debate. The first argument I'm going for here is that extinction and genocide are the primary impacts around which you should base your decision. They've read evidence, we've conceded that the world, we know it's ending, falling into ever greater cycles of extraction and genocide that culminate in ecological devastation, which means that it's try or die. Fairness is not a yes or question. It is a sliding scale, which means you should be willing to risk a small loss of fairness or skills for exponentially more relevant education and deliberation in the face of a global system of violence that only we have inroads to resolving, which means it's just a simple impact calculus question. The lack of impact calculus as if the tournament means that you should not buy their fairness just comes first arguments because it doesn't understand the way in which fairness operates. It's given that we have a model. Second, the basis of alliance is an epistemological commitment to the financialization and information paradigm that materializes the collective unconscious. NATO cannot be separated from the wargaming of think tanks and crises and the derivative market of debate, which means the act of is the reduction of that, but that affirmative is the only way to confront into the relationship of alliances by changing our relationship with information. Clash cannot do that in a vacuum, which means you should not prioritize as a just simple clash because some kinds of dogma are good and not everything is worth iterating over. The third argument is that the general strike against the computer resolves the vast majority of the offense. We've won the system requires intellectual labor in order to perfect itself while hedging against its number of crises, which means you withdrawing from that process and taking control of your own labor power can effectuate those circuits of informatic control that would otherwise drive you towards further informatic balance. To refuse towards a generative product we do not yet know the potential that it can have, which means you should not underestimate your capacity to change your political horizons. But debate does set the limits of our political horizons. Your balance not need to spill over because the balance is not to ship for anyone but single tap room who won or lost. The question is whether you will accept our invitation or not. It cannot resolve a procedural fairness violation because all it does is a signal that we lost. Nobody knows why. Nobody gives a fuck about this debate, which is why it's not a question of it. Only thing it can do, we cannot actualize alliance policy, which the ballot cannot do anything in a policy debate either. Framework. Debate might be a game, but it has a history and community. We aren't just competitive. We are also people who talk and study and care for each other. The cooperation versus competition debate determines the direction of fairness because we've won that incentives come from the model, not from individuals being naturally competitive. Existing critical debates prove this because we still debate the topic against each other, even when we know we won't have to debate. Framework that reveals that it does not justify non-resolutional acts. People just don't do those things because there are cooperative norms that exist within our epistemic communities. The way in which we are trained, the relationships we have to other people in debate, their only answer is that debaters are competitive because they'll break new apps, but that does not mean the competition over determines everything, which means it's try or die for all models to create an alternative incentive. This is the strictly on top of the policy as part of DH the model because we still incentivize resolutional discussion. You can see that the TVA still frames that this doesn't solve any of their clash offense anyway. New apps is just not a good enough answer to respond to this. Voluntary limits is a key framing question because the topic paper, the thing that they said we negotiated in advance, which is why it was predictable, concedes that topical or the critical fairness are not impossible to debate, but rather are the core of the topic, specifically this affirmative, which reveals the way in which epistemic communities mediate your relationship to things like limits or predictability. People voluntarily choose to limit ourselves. Why there's no limits explosion. They haven't answered this. It's the anarchist theory of voluntary association that derives from the Bellarmines. They haven't gotten to the neural network TA. Is the only other argument I need here because they consider the iteration only refines the starting assumptions of the model. It does not break down dogma. They're saying that we have evidence, but you don't. It's wrong when we've A, impact towards reading evidence, and B, yes, we do. That's all the Beller cards. Some dogmatism is good against capitalism, but we've won the classes on the neutral technology. The same way the machine learning creates more racist predictive policing algorithms, or their evidence in this debate has ontologized the same racist assumptions of the world. Their faith in the neutrality of information, and things like liberalism, the idea that they can make us better people. Hegemony also means that hegemony can make us worse. Beyond that, we run that analysis oscillation between liberalism and conservatives that only secures an ongoing genocide that we both participate in. Iterating of the Rand Corporation suggestions for total war or via a plan debate only makes us see wherever our prefigures our imaginations toward the continuation of the system, which is why it doesn't resolve any of those offense. Rather, it makes it banal. A switch side debate, switching forms is necessarily better. It's not a question of performativity, but rather how we approach the resolution, whether we engage in different ways, why multi-model debate is necessary. So status quo debate where we do what we can, but it actualizes and it kind of gets rid of the sort of impetus to understand debate is neutral, which is why it results in the TV is a power fantasy, and it inculcates us into a crisis of agency where we cannot let the world affect us. Think about how colonized life in the global south is a commodity for circulation, and kind of via the wargaming of debate, via the fiat and saving, via Plandex, these things inculcate us into a crisis of agency where we can only ever speculate and simulate and bet on the world, but never let it affect us, which means it can never shape our ethical presupposition. There's a reason why Neil Katyal is defending Nestle Corporation charges of African child slavery. Ryan Biermeister, Carl Rove, these aren't spectacular examples. They're the quotidian form of debate. It is much easier for this activity to make us bad people. Your choice is whether you'll let it.
Good debate, Wake.
Good debate.
Good debate, y'all.
y'all.
Are judges okay with the RFD being streamed?
Hey, Wake, which Beller card are you referencing? I noticed that there's multiple in the 2AR.
I'm sorry, we had our headphones off. Can you say it again?
Oh, no worries. I was asking which Beller card are you referencing, like in the 2AR? And I guess it's, I'm assuming it's in the 2AC doc, but there are multiple Beller cards.
They're in the 1AC actually, and
Okay.
it's I think there's 3 or 4 in the 1AC, but like they're all sort of speaking to it. I'm
Okay.
sorry that isn't a specific enough answer for you, but
Oh, no
they're all
worries.
very
I can
good.
figure it out.
Okay, thanks, Tommy.
Yo, Emory, is Grossberg the self-reflexivity evidence?
Yeah, it's Grossberg, not Goodman. I think it was referenced as Goodman. It's Grossberg in the 2NC.
Cool. Thanks. We are in. Looks like we've got Emory and Wake, and a nice panoramic view just became Al. So, Tommy, do I have the button? Can I beckon? No beckon button. Tommy. Hey, Tommy, not sure if you're, oh yeah, nice. Okay, everybody good? Okay, congratulations on a great debate. The decision's a 3-0 for the affirmative from Wake Forest. I do not mind starting because I'm pretty sure I was the last ballot in, unless anybody objects. I thought this was just a wonderful debate to evaluate with some room for improvement in the final rebuttals. I'm voting F because it's an ethical intervention into the knowledge economy to bump our ethical orientation a little bit closer to addressing the failures of liberalism, capitalism, and whatever the world computer is to address the spiraling global crises that are happening now. The core of my decision is the affirmative impact calculus, that it's try or die, that 1% solvency for bumping along our ethical orientation is more valuable than 100% negative solvency for fairness. My decision has a hell of a lot of Bostromian logic to it, and I find that the consistency between the 1AR and the 2AR on this impact calculus makes it sort of easy to come to the place that I ultimately end up. Framework. Before I talk about the 4 specific things that I think I need to address, I want to kind of give a little overview of my decision. I think that the negative has a great goalie, but almost no offense, and barely tries to take a shot on why your values of debate are good. What I want is 2 to 3 minutes on one impact module with a deep explanation of a turns case argument contextualized to both your impact and the affirmative impacts. What I get is like 15 seconds on fairness and 15 seconds on ballot proximity with a lot of defense, but not a lot of reasons to vote negative. 4 things I need to talk about on framework. The first is fairness. This isn't my favorite starting point. You know, I'd probably think you'd be better off if you went for Clash. But, you know, even then, there's just not a whole lot of work done on why this is the most important thing I need to consider. The key line is that fairness link turns the affirmative because it leads to a cooperative dialogue, which is good according to the negative because the affirmative says cooperative dialogue is good. Okay, a couple of problems with this. The first is that you haven't really explained how cooperative dialogue solves the affirmative. There's a couple of intuitive explanations that I can definitely think of, but you haven't given them to me. And you're wrong about the only warrant that you extend, that the affirmative says cooperative dialogue is good. Like, let's jump back to cross-ex of the 1AC. You sort of like try to put some words to like shove them into Wake's mouth and say, all right, we all agree cooperative dialogue is good. So, and then Wake is like, no, we are going to problematize Clash, which they do consistently. So I don't think you get the only warrant here. The second place I look is ballot proximity. And I end up with kind of like 3 issues with this. The first is that I think there is some like small AF solvency spelled out on, you know, what ethical interventions into the knowledge economy can do, what withdrawing my intellectual knowledge production can do. Like, these are small things, sure. But then it's like, you know, I go right back to impact calculus. It's like, how much do I care about fairness? Almost none. How much do I care about like global spiraling crises that kill everyone and prioritize the global north or the global south? Like a whole bunch. And, you know, minor adjustments, ethical orientation. The self-reflexivity arg, I just don't think the Grossberg evidence says anything. This is another place where it's like, yeah, I could vote for this, but your evidence is just like, there's a lot of knowledge. It's like super hard to like study, and then like makes a socialization argument that like probably is Wake's we meet argument that I'm not voting for, but is definitely not an argument about self-reflexivity. 2NR has a citation, not a warrant, so I can't like do more additional unpacking for you here. And I don't know, like Grossberg in the 90s, I thought was awesome and like did a whole bunch of like groundbreaking scholarly work. And like the book, We Got to Get Out of This Place, is awesome. But like 2000s, teens, just like Grossberg seems like a grumpy old man who doesn't like people talking about identity or race and hasn't written anything useful. This card fitting into that, I think. The last place I look is the TVA and switch side debate. And honestly, you definitely get the most juice out of this part of the debate for me. It's like I said, strong defense, but like not enough. They've got, arguments about why it's an investment in liberalism that is unproductive, that trains us to be more effective war criminals, that it's too neutral, which means that, yeah, we could get some better skills, but like what we use those things for is not locked in. And I should prioritize locking in an ethical orientation over the okay, sorry, Alice chats. An ethical orientation over neutral skills, which could be deployed for evil things. Just some super quick comments before I yield my time. The 2NR, 3 things. 1, prioritize offense. 2, I thought case was a better strategy. They have 2 args to answer space. 1, if society is unethical, I should let everyone die. You're going to win Extinction Outweighs versus that. And 2, financialization disproves the overview effect, which is an answer to your turns case argument, not an answer to your external offense, which means you could have easily gotten me on Extinction Outweighs and probably beaten whatever financialization turns the overview effect means. The last comment I have is that I really thought you were going to lose this round on breeding grounds. Like, I am shocked that wasn't like a big portion of the 2NR. You just like don't get to it. 1AR is like independent voting issue. You said Black people are breeding grounds for crime. It's just like, I can't believe that wasn't a bigger deal. For the affirmative, I thought you would have had an easier path to victory on breeding grounds. I thought you would have an easier path to victory if you jettisoned all the we meet stuff, like the socialization of the topic and the topic paper. Like, no offense to Emory debaters, but it's just like, I don't understand why I should care what you thought the topic should be in April 2020. Like, why is that an important thing? Like, you're winning the impact turns, not the we meet. So I thought if you started with, you train us to be war criminals like the 1AR did, it would have been a little bit more effective. And then the last thing is that I think you should have stolen Bostrom and just been like, every second delay, 10 to the 22nd lives is our impact calculus argument.
I can go next if that's okay with you, Tommy, or you can go. Okay. I have a little bit different but fundamentally similar decision. The thing I dropped in the chat that I will mention here, kind of at the outset, I thought it was a different Grossberg at first, not Larry Grossberg, and it turns out I was just wrong about that. So I tried to correct Matt, and I was wrong to correct Matt. The one thing I will say is I think that card actually does say a thing. I actually think it says an AF type thing, because what I think it really gets to is, in a world where we have a whole bunch of data, what we wind up doing is defaulting to something that sounds an awful lot like epistemic communities that are, created through practices of citation. And then it, kind of makes their point, but a little bit differently. So, that wasn't an argument that was made, but it was a thing that I noticed and I wanted to flag for Emory. The short version is, I think that, like Matt, I needed a little bit more explanation of fairness. I absolutely spot you that you in a impact there or a link there. I need more impact calculus, and what I'd actually kind of like to see you do, Emory, is push it even further than I think Matt would even let you, which is maybe frame it as almost a try or die argument in a way, or enframed by the world computer, capitalism, neural networks, all that kind of jazz. That's inevitable. What we do have control over is the nature of the word games that we play, and creating a more fair model of debate helps deal with, check back against some of the ways that, our enframed makes it hard for us to, develop more ethical debate practices, because it comes down to what we can accomplish rhetorically rather than, what tools we have to do it with. In other words, it brings back a sense of invention into debate. So I think if you push that farther, you could actually probably get me. I sort of am with you about fairness being an independent good, and I'm willing to string pretty far along, but you got to do a little more work for me. What actually kind of determines the directionality of my decision is 2 things. The first is, I think that the affirmatives claim that there's a history of debate that creates privileged sets of assumptions within our epistemic community about what constitutes good argument that, makes it hard for me to check back against a lot of the affirmative's offense, because I think in that world, their critique of, the neutrality that framework's supposed to promote is untrue, that, our history means we're going to privilege some arguments. The other sort of access question that I think the affirmative's ahead on is this idea that, the way that research and basically knowledge production, because we rely on a world inframed by capital, privileges the production of certain knowledge. So it isn't just about debate, it's also about the broader sort of world we live in, which means that what looks like fairness maybe isn't fairness, and it definitely does privilege the conclusion that Matt gets to, which is we turn into less ethical folks as a product of debate. And I'm going to put an asterisk here that I just think that's kind of untrue. I do sort of like the argument you're making, Emory, that people come in like that or they leave like that, but it isn't because of what we do here. That's something that people bring to debate, not something that debate does to them. I'd like a better warrant for it, or a more thoroughly fleshed out warrant for it. I also sort of for a minute kind of gave this TVA debate a little bit of thought, and the idea that we're asking them to switch form, not content. The biggest problem that I have is I think the AF is winning some claims about, well, for want of a better way to do it, to get into the research that would have you defending a topical plan, it probably forces you to sever some of the literature that would produce this form. The other problem about it is I think they're winning an argument that says that model of debate that would require us to switch this form is contributing to, and perhaps also controlled by, sort of the wargaming complex, I think is the term that they're using. In the abstract, I'm unconvinced that that's true without maybe some more specific examples. Like, you can pick out someone like Anil Kachal and say, on the one hand, he definitely maybe has done some unethical things, but he also sued the government over the practice of indefinite detention. And that's also a pretty damn good thing to have done. So, maybe it's that he's an attorney who has to take cases, not that he's, an inherent warmonger or anything like that. In fact, maybe in a way the opposite. So, in the abstract, I'm not super convinced that's true, but it isn't really pressed back against too much in the debate. I think that if the negative is going to go for framework, at least some of the case arguments that would provide some pushback against kind of the theory of the AF and sort of the, I guess, pessimism about the way the status quo operates would maybe be helpful. Something that challenges, their overarching claim, coupled with this framework, would get a bit further. I will also agree with Matt. I thought the breeding ground argument was, a potentially extremely easy resolution to the debate that the negative has to be attuned to, and the affirmative also could have taken advantage of. I will hedge back a little bit against one thing Matt said, which is he really wants you to go for the case debate. I think it's harder to do that because some of those access questions are also present on the case page. So I kind of think you might have made a right call, but needed a little different execution. So, I just like to disagree with Matt as part of that deal too, maybe. So those are kind of my thoughts. If you have a more specific question, circle back to me after Tommy gives his decision.
Yeah, largely in agreement. I think I'll kind of take off where Al finished. I think that you need, I think the case was a lot of noise. I think that if you have 2 or 3 good cards that contest the apps, theory of power, or kind of like the overarching kind of relationship between knowledge and domination. I think that that gets you much, much further ahead than like, you know, 4 of these, I don't know, like techno-pessimism stuff, right? I think that for me, I hesitate the longest on this argument of like, they drop T means that we don't get to weigh the AF. And I think that this is one of those situations where you kind of let the technical concessions kind of miss the big picture, right? Or mislead you about the big picture, right? I think that if you make it like, if you give me a framing about technical concessions and like build that up into like a presumption issue or something, because like, I'm not sure what it means to not weigh the AF, I guess. Like, does that mean I don't weigh the like world of the, like their kind of epistemic rejection, or does that mean like I don't weigh any cross applications or any theory of power from the AF to the framework flow? Like, I'm just not sure, right? And I feel comfortable kind of with Tessa's argument that you know, like the race science stuff on case is indicative of the problem of like how we think what is okay to argue just because we are topical or not, right? Like I think that that is like a fine kind of extension from the case debate for me to at least say like there is offense on the framework flow. I think also like you don't have to extend the race science thing, right? Like that's a moment where you should be like, our bad. Like we're not gonna go for this argument. Like just like kind of have those moments of reflexivity where it's like, oh, this could be a real bad look in the 2AR. I maybe should try and make this go away instead of doubling down, right? Also, just like TLDR, like, have you seen how much crime there is in rural America? Like, it's just like one of those things where it's like the Dukes of Hazzard County, Kentucky. What's really going on here, right? So it's just like, you know, kind of like take a moment, step back, get your head out of the debate and say maybe that's where they've gotten some good offense. We should try and kind of make that go away. And that could be done by, I think another thing, I think I was a little bit more sympathetic to this argument about big data being good. Like, I think that that was like a really good argument. I think that was the best part of the webinar, was linking them back into that. And just being like, yeah, we need to be able to like monitor when like rainforests are dying and like fisheries are going extinct. Like that stuff's good. I was like, yeah, I'll vote on that with the quickness, right? And I think that like, to be honest, that combined with the extinction outweighs stuff is a pretty easy neg ballot for me. Just like, it just seems like a pretty easy story to tell into an hour. I guess the last thing I would say is like strategically, I think that you had too much going on. And I think combining that big data good stuff with just like a simple pick of like do the AF except for like when we need data about environmental concerns. It's like, okay, what offense do they have then, right? And like, are you willing, would you rather have a negative block where you proliferate on like big data good for environment and environmentalism good debate, or would you rather have a negative block where you're kind of extending like 3 different kind of pieces of or sections of argumentation against the AF case that I think utterly kind of, or ultimately kind of end up kind of thin, right? Kind of shallow. The last thing I'll say is that I think that I tend to be kind of in line with what Al's saying as far as like people. I think I'm generally in agreement with your argument that like people come out of debate better, generally as people, right? Like better thinkers, right? I think that what would behoove the neg to do is to say, if anything, like the lack of clash turns people into like these really kind of like pretty bad like lefties that like don't know how to kind of like apply like the radical stuff that they've been learning to critique into praxis outside of debate, and like kind of internal linking like a portable skills stuff, right? Where it's like you avoid the clash, and so therefore you become the dogmatic one, and like the portable skills that you use don't become like, you know, don't make you into a war criminal. They make you into like a kind of noob activist that like just ruins activism spaces and things like that. But that's it for me. Great debate. I think that, you know, this was a debate that was essentially deciding the rebuttals. So I think it's great that you all are able to keep things close all the way through.